welcome. Welcome to those of you that are in the place this morning. Welcome to those of you that are joining with us online. Are you blessed this morning?
Amen.
All right, I just say that because I need a little time. That's why I'm asking questions like that. All right, so we are in a series called Really Bad Ideas. Yeah, we love hearing about really bad ideas, and so we're going to hear some more. This morning, I love sharing about really bad ideas. If anyone is an expert on really bad ideas, it's this guy right here. So, I know you're beginning to question why you're listening then. All right. So we want to get into. So what was last week? Last week's really bad idea was whatever doesn't kill you. What? Oh. Wait a minute. That's what you're looking for, right? Something searching for me, Bo. All right. We'll give it a minute. But I have it open. You need it? It's your fault. Those of you that are online. I'm talking to you. You can just have it. Online people, it's all you. Oh, wait, then I need it because that's the mic. All right. So I'll just wait. Talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you a topic. You remember that for the Sunday Night Live bit? Okay, nobody. Oh, that's great. It's going so well this morning. Remember the ladies? Coffee talk. Come on, Matt. I know you know coffee talk. So I'm good. I'm good. All right. I can proceed. All right. Those of you in the room can hear me. Everyone else online can listen to what Kyle has to say. Let's get the mic. All right. So we talked about whatever doesn't kill you makes you weaker. And there's this idea that we're so fragile and we're so frail that we have to be so careful with everybody. And not true. There's some things that, there are times that things can injure you. And there are, in fact, some occasions where things that don't kill you do damage you. I think, if some of you saw the video, I think I posted a video on the church group where Jonathan Haidt said, there's been research on this. Death does not make you stronger. You are diminished by death. And so that's not, it's not a 100% thing, but we've sort of gotten this idea that everyone is so weak and everyone is so frail, and we need to always be on the constant lookout for the smallest things that might damage somebody. Now, as believers, we want to be courteous, we want to be generous, we want to be loving. We don't want to say like, hey man, I went to church and the pastor said we really don't have to be that careful about our words because so what? I'm just making people tougher. You know what I mean? I'm just toughening people up. We want to be gracious and we want to be loving, but we're not as weak as some might think we are. So what doesn't kill you actually makes you stronger most of the time. All right. So bad idea number 2 this morning, and I just thought this is such a fascinating thing to me because, I'll get into it. I'll get into why. So this morning it's always, I'm trying to find a different way to set it up. Always trust your feelings. Always trust your feelings. This is surprising to me because probably even in this room, there's a difference of opinion about this. Probably even in this room, there's some that think, wait a minute, I'm confused. I thought you were talking about bad ideas. And then you said, always trust your feelings. You must have misspoken because trusting your feelings, trust your gut. That's a good thing. Some have been encouraged to do that. I talked to somebody a couple weeks ago, and I was sharing these ideas, and they said, I was taught to trust my gut. You're supposed to if something doesn't feel right, don't go with it. And you know what? If it feels right, then just go with it, right? So we won't ask for a show of hands or anything like that, but I think this is far more common than what we might realize. So I realize that even in this room, and perhaps those of you that are online, there's probably a wide variance in degree on who buys into this. But I submit to you this morning that always trusting your feelings is not good advice. There are lots of things that are right, the right thing to do that feels bad, right? I remember as a kid, I would often say, Mom, Dad, I don't want to do this thing. And they said, well, sometimes you have to do things that you don't like. Sometimes you do things that don't feel good. Sometimes the right thing doesn't feel good to do. And sometimes the wrong thing feels like, perfect, right? Like, excellent. That's the way I want to go. The selfish route, that's the way I want to go. The non-forgiving route, count me in. That's what it feels great in a weird sort of a way. So things feel good that are wrong, and the right thing isn't always the comfortable thing to do. So I want to just say quickly that feelings are God-given. Your emotions and feelings, I'll use those words interchangeably. Feelings are real. Feelings can be, and you'll see an argument can be made that feelings are extraordinarily compelling. And feelings might be a hint that something may be wrong, but feelings should most definitely be questioned. We shouldn't just say, hey, this is the way I feel, and so I'm gonna respond this way. Now, I can remember way back in Sunday school as a kid, and then talking about that we shouldn't be led by our emotions. I don't know what happened. I don't think I was particularly emotional, but for some reason, the message got through. Maybe I was shocked by that. Maybe it was strange to me, but I remember being taught at a very young age that you can't trust your feelings, and Christians shouldn't, of all people, shouldn't be led by their emotions and by their feelings. And so that has been with me, almost as long as I can remember. Now, that doesn't mean I've always executed that. That doesn't mean I've always walked in that perfectly, but I've had that understanding. And so when I hear even Christians saying, well, you should trust your gut, just trust, if it feels right, go with it. If it doesn't, if something feels off, then maybe avoid that thing. We good? Thanks, man. Was it my fault? That's all I need to know. All right. Not something that I did, maybe. I don't know. A reboot situation, perhaps. Welcome to those of you that are joining us online. So we got our mic up and running now, so we're glad that you are here with us. So we're talking about all bad ideas, and it's a bad idea to always trust your feelings. All right, so I read about this elephant metaphor. I don't know if this is original to this particular author, but I read about this elephant metaphor, and I'll need to read much of this. I don't want to mess this up. So one author described your mind as like a rider on top of an elephant. So the mind so imagine an elephant with a rider sitting atop. The mind is divided into different parts. Sometimes those parts conflict with one another, right? You've experienced that, right? You're thinking one thing, but maybe you feel a different way, right? So the rider on top of the elephant represents your conscious mind, your higher level thinking, the smartest parts of you. That represents the rider. The elephant, however, why can't I say elephant this morning? That's like twice now. I'm keeping track. The elephant represents everything else, most of which is outside of our conscious awareness, all right? Elephant rider is the smart part. I don't want to say the smart part, the conscious part, the higher level thinking. All of your brain is pretty good. We don't want to discard any of it, all right? So we're fans of the whole brain. But there's the conscious part and the subconscious part. Subconscious represented by the elephant. So the rider often believes that he is in control. Higher thinking, I'm a rational person. I'm a thinking person. I'm not swayed by my emotions. I don't just go with, how I feel. The rider often believes that he is in control. But if a conflict arises between the rider and the elephant usually wins. He goes on to say that the rider usually functions more like the elephant's servant than the elephant's master. So the higher thinking the rider, the elephant might represent your emotions and your feelings. And when those things conflict, what usually wins? The bigger, stronger, more powerful elephant. And rather than the rider actually being in control, although he thinks he may be, the elephant is actually calling the shots. And when there's a disagreement between the two, the elephant usually wins that disagreement. So the rider usually functions as the servant rather than the master of the elephant. And then I thought this was interesting. He goes on to write, the rider has become, and I think this is important, has become extremely skilled at making up justifications for whatever the elephant does or believes. So rider and elephant have a conflict. Elephant's in charge. He's bigger, doesn't listen to the so-called master. Elephant does what he wants, and then the rider justifies, well, I'm really in control. The reason that it happened this way, the reason that it turned out this way, like we're good at making justifications and explaining why we're really not in control of ourselves. The rider has become extremely skilled at making up justifications for whatever the elephant does or believes. So I think that is human nature. That applies to all of us. We're pretty good at making justifications for why we responded a certain way. And the reason isn't always because we're rational, we're thoughtful, we took time and weighed out all the evidence and made a well-informed decision. Very, very often, it's just an emotional decision. And then the mind makes up the reasons to justify why we made that emotional decision. This metaphor was used by a set of other authors. This is Dan Heath and Chip Heath, who wrote the book Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. And they wrote this about the elephant and the rider. Most of us, I thought this was a great quote, most of us are all too familiar with situations in which the elephant overpowers the rider. They go on. You've experienced this if you've ever slept in, overeaten, dialed up your ex at midnight. I thought that was funny too. I'm glad you laughed at that. Procrastinated, tried to quit smoking and failed. If you skipped the gym, if you've gotten angry and said something you regretted. If you abandon your Spanish or your piano lessons. If you refuse to speak up at a meeting because you were scared, and so on, then you've experienced the elephant overpowering the rider. Sad to say, but very, very often our emotions are in charge. Now, maybe we think that's a great thing. We're going to speak to that here in just a moment. But probably even for those of us that think, I'm rational and I don't allow my emotions to interfere with my higher thinking. We're probably wrong about that more often than we realize, or we do that more often than we realize. So the Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5:7, he says that, and you know this, we walk by faith, or we live by faith and not by sight. And so here, as believers, we take it even to another level. So in the secular world, they might talk about, and some do, not all, but some do, talk about you shouldn't trust your emotions. Emotions are fleeting. Emotions change. Emotions can be affected by a great number of things. I love, I've shared with you before, AA has an acronym that they use, which I think is so powerful to keep someone from slipping back into their addiction. They use the acronym HALT. I don't know if anybody remembers that. If you've heard that, I've talked about it once or twice. HALT. So when you're feeling tempted to relapse, you think of the acronym HALT. All right, so what does that mean? And this is good for all of us. So H is hungry. All right, so be careful about decisions that you make when you are hungry. We've invented a new word for that. What do we call that? Sort of like hungry, but we jam some words together. Hangry, right? So now you know what A represents. Anger, right? So be careful. So we've smashed those two together in the world in which we live. So we know hangry. What an awesome thing. We recognize that when we're hungry. And I remember as a younger person, you're so disconnected from what is going on in your body. And then I don't know how old you have to get, but at some point you realize, wow, I'm grouchy because I'm hungry, right? Like there's this phase where the baby does it, right? They go insane when they're hungry. And then there's this time, I think, at least in my life, you sort of forget about that. And then you realize, why am I being rude to everyone? Oh, I guess it's been a while since I've eaten. The blood sugar is low. And so you become conscious of those things. So HALT, hungry, angry. L is lonely, and I didn't rehearse this. T is, tired. T is tired. So the point is, like, you might feel a certain way because you're hungry. You might make decisions when you're lonely that you wouldn't normally make if you're having your emotional needs met. If you're angry, you should probably be careful about decisions that you make. You know, one thing I've noticed in all my years of ministry, talking with people, and I began to notice a pattern of when people use this phrase, and I've shared this with you before. When people use the phrase, you know what, I just don't care anymore. You've heard that expression. Phil Collins sang a great song years ago in the 80s. I don't care anymore. I like to tell people when I hear them now say, you know what, I just don't care anymore. I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. You will. You're about to. Because very often, if not every time, when someone says, you know what, I just come to this place in my life where I just don't care anymore. It's, you will. Give it 5 minutes. Give it an hour or so. Maybe a week. But whatever that thing that you thought, I'm going to do this because I just don't care anymore, you're probably going to care. So you were making an emotional decision, and I found from experience, those usually just don't turn out all that well. Anybody with me in the place this morning? All right. So be careful about it. So halt. So your emotions can affect decisions that you make. Again, some of you may agree with this, some of you may not, but even those of us that agree we shouldn't be guided by our emotions, I want to suggest to you that it happens more often than we realize. Jeremiah, so Paul says that we live by faith and not by sight. That's, I started to say a moment ago, that even the secular world says maybe, don't get involved in emotional thinking. Try to be rational about things. I think as believers, we can accept that, but as believers, we can even take that a step further, in that we're a people that are supposed to live by faith. I mean, rationale and higher thinking maybe trump your emotions, but we know that in our sinful nature, like, my mind isn't all that trustworthy either, especially when it comes to issues of faith. And so there, the Bible is our final authority. Now, I've used my mind and some reason, and I think there's a number of good reasons to believe and to trust the Bible. Because you know what? It just feels good. That's not the greatest reason to. It's not a good reason to believe the Bible. Are there rational reasons to believe the Bible, or is it totally a faith thing? There's reasons to believe the Scriptures. I've looked at other Scriptures. I've looked at the authenticity and the authority of the Scriptures, how they came about, how they were transmitted to us, how they were treated historically, and how they were passed down to us. And I trust the Bible, right? I can use my rational mind to trust the Bible. Now, once I've gotten there, when there's things in the Scripture that I don't quite understand, then it's a faith thing. You understand? Did I lose you? I'll wait. I saw some expressions that were concerning to me. So I would encourage you, don't just go, I like this idea of eternal life in heaven. I think it's a cool idea, so I'm buying in. Right? So maybe there's something more you should look into besides that. Like, there are historic, logical, reasonable, scientific even, historic reasons to trust the Scriptures. It's not just, I don't know anything, but I just have decided to believe it. All right? And maybe even get your start that way. But I don't think you should live without ever looking at the evidence for the authority of the Scriptures. And so unbelievers will sometimes look at the Christian and go, well, you just believe it all on faith. No, there's good reasons to believe what we believe. It's reasonable to believe what we believe. I accept the Scriptures as authoritative. I've compared them to other Scriptures, and I don't want to be nasty, but the quickest way I could say it to save time is the others are kind of silly. There's not much there. The history is clearly not real history, and even the things that we might find difficult to believe in the biblical narrative is far easier than a great many other works. There are good, solid reasons why thinking, bright, intelligent people should trust the Bible. All right? I think I said it clearer. I'm not going to even look at your faces because I don't even want to know now if I didn't clear it up. And having accepted the scriptures now, when I come across something in the scriptures that I have difficulty with, I think, well, I don't understand this part, but I trust this book. I trust what this says. And so if I'm in conflict, especially my feelings, but even my mind, if it's in conflict with a passage, then I think, you know what? I don't understand this yet, and I'm trusting what God's word has to say. Does that make sense? Now, if I had intellectual problems with every sentence, I probably wouldn't be a Christian. Are you with me this morning? Right? Good, solid, bright people have good evidence for trusting the Bible. But when I have trouble with a part of it, faith kicks in. And so I would suggest to you your mind and rationale over your emotions, but your faith even over your natural fallen mind. Jeremiah says in chapter 17:9, a passage that is familiar to most of you, the heart, and that really speaks to our emotions, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? The heart or your emotions or your feelings are deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Right? So Jeremiah tells us that our feelings and our thoughts, our heart, our emotions, and our feelings cannot be trusted. A great example of this is, having been a Christian for many, many years, it's sort of like Almond Joy. So dumb. Sometimes you feel like you're saved. Sometimes you don't. Okay, young people, there was this really old commercial about candy bars. And they said, sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's that way. Sometimes you feel like, man, I just feel the love of God showering over me. And I know I'm as sure for heaven as if I'm already there. And it's an emotional, I just feel God's presence and I feel his love and I feel him just surrounding me. I love those moments when they come. But how many of you know, if you don't feel saved, it doesn't change the fact that you're saved. The reason that you are a child of God is because of the faith that you have placed in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. If you believe that, if you trust that, then you're a Christian. Some days you don't feel like you're saved, but you are. The reality of the scriptures trumps whatever you might feel like. I believe that sometimes God will withdraw his presence from you. I love and have enjoyed the feeling and the experience of the presence of God in my life, but it's not always there. And that doesn't change my standing with him because of how I feel. I believe that he may even withdraw his tangible presence, felt presence from me, so that I will press in, so that I will continue to trust. If he's pushing me along and makes me feel warm fuzzies of his presence, I don't know why I said warm fuzzies. If he just makes me feel an emotional experience every moment of my saved life, then where's the faith? But he may withdraw his presence and say, you know what, you need to learn a couple things about how life works. And let's see if you can plow through just trusting me and not feeling me upholding you with my righteous right hand. And so the fact that we may feel saved and not feel saved doesn't matter if we're trusting in Jesus. Can I get a witness in the place this morning? Sometimes you may feel that God loves you. But sometimes when we sin against him and then we run from his presence, we may not feel like, how can he possibly love me after what I've done? Does the fact that you don't understand his love for you, does that change his love for you? That's not even your feeling. That's how you, I can't even wrap my mind. So now we're talking about the intellect. I can't wrap my mind around why God would love me.
That's okay. You don't have to understand it. I mean, it helps, right? But it doesn't change the reality of that truth, whether you can comprehend it or whether you feel like you're loved. And I've got other examples here. You get the idea. You feel God's presence. Sometimes you feel his presence. Sometimes you don't. Think about, I'm going to look at Hebrews real quick. If you look at Hebrews chapter 11, that's the Faith Hall of Fame, where the list is given of all these biblical heroes that accomplished these great things by their faith. And time doesn't permit us this morning, but you could look at that later, and when some of those heroes are named, you could just ask yourself, did that person feel like doing that thing? Did Noah feel like building an ark? He probably had other things on his agenda, right? Probably didn't feel like doing that. And I just want to pick out one and move on, just to give you a good example from the scriptures. Hebrews 11:17 says, by faith Abraham, when God tested him, and most of you know the story, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Verse 19, and Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead. And figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. And so if you don't know the story, I have to just give you a quick, I don't want to leave you with that if you don't know the story, but most of you know it. So Abraham had one son. It was given to him and his wife through miraculous birth. They were both elderly when Sarah conceived, and it was promised to Abraham that he would have many descendants that would come through that son. And then God said, I want you to sacrifice your son. It was a test. And Abraham got him on the altar, tied up. I mean, he's on top of the wood, and the flame is just a few feet away, and Abraham is ready to take the knife to the sacrifice, and God stops him. God wanted to see if Abraham trusted him and had faith in him, and if he would offer his very best of what he had back unto the Lord. And then God stopped him. Test passed, okay? But having that understanding, let's look at this again. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice, who he had received. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. All right? So if you didn't understand that before, that should be a little bit more clear. And verse 19, and Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. And so look at the great faith of Abraham. God has told me to sacrifice this son, but he's also told me that I'll have descendants come through this son. And so I can't really figure out how that's going to work in my mind unless after he's sacrificed, God is going to raise him back from the dead. That's how confident he was in God. That is a man of faith. He just figured, well, God's a promise keeper. He's going to keep his promises. So he's asked me to sacrifice my son. It's a little unusual, but he also promised that this son is going to have children, and he hasn't yet. And so he reasoned that God must raise him from the dead, which is why the author here says, figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead, because in Abraham's mind, Isaac was as good as dead. That's the kind of man of faith that Abraham was. But I really love the second word of this verse. Abraham had a feeling that God could raise the dead. Abraham just sort of sensed it, that God could raise the dead. Abraham had an emotional response that led him to believe that God could raise the dead. It's not what it says, is it? Abraham what? Let's all say it together. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead. You suppose Abraham had some emotional reactions with his son bound on an altar ready for sacrifice? You suppose Abraham felt like unsheathing his knife and bringing it up to Isaac's throat? You suppose it was something that he felt like doing? Do you suppose Abraham had some emotions that were at play in this situation? Without a doubt. But he also trusted God in the situation. And so I want you to see that Abraham wasn't led by his feelings. He wasn't led by his emotions. He was led by his faith, his confidence, and his trust in God's promises. And so should we. All right, we'll move on here. I want to just talk briefly about, I can condense this some, but there is some thinking today that actually encourages emotional reasoning. Now that's what it's been called, but that's really an oxymoron, emotional reasoning. Because there's not a whole lot of reasoning that goes on when you are being emotional. Imagine that there was a scholar that said, I know all the weight of the evidence is against me, and I'm trying to prove whatever it is, gravity or whatever the thing is. And I know that and then other scientists are debating him, saying, this is the scientific process. You come up with a theory, and then other people try to punch holes in it, and then if it withstands, then you probably are onto something legitimate. Imagine that his colleagues punch holes in all of his arguments, all of his beliefs, all of his theories, and he says, guys, I know the weight of the evidence is against me, and I have no evidence for what I believe, but I just feel like this is true. It's really not how that is supposed to work. Today, people are encouraged to trust their feelings. I think this is probably more widespread than I even imagined. I was never told, just trust your gut. I never heard that advice, but people have. Today, people are encouraged to trust their feelings. Often, this is taking place on college campuses, where you would think logic and reason would win the day, but rather, people are encouraged to trust how they feel. How you feel trumps everything. And while I can't say for sure, I suspect that this is related to what we talked about last week, that the smallest little thing can damage you and wound you and cripple you for life. The smallest thing is going to do irreparable damage to you. So many of you know, I may have told you the story, but many years ago, I served on a jury. It was 3 weeks long, which I thought it was pretty long, and it turns out they even said at the courthouse that was a pretty long trial. It was a case of shaken baby. The daycare provider was accused of shaking a toddler. And so for 3 weeks, we listened to this and the arguments back and forth. And so when it came time for deliberation, right, you're supposed to, I always get this wrong, you're supposed to convict it, or what is it? There's the reasonable doubt, and then there's shadow of a doubt. We didn't hear the shadow of a doubt thing. I can't remember what that was. But beyond a reasonable doubt. So the prosecution had to prove that this daycare provider actually shook this baby and caused damage, caused injury to the child. But if the prosecutor was unable to prove that the injuries that this child sustained were perhaps from somewhere else, or that if the prosecutor was unable to prove that the daycare provider was the one responsible for the injuries, then there's no conviction. And so in deliberation, we talked and went round and round, and we were actually told that we actually took a long time with deliberation as well. The judge commended us, like, you guys are thinking about this, you're taking this very seriously, and so we spent some time. But as we kind of worked through this process, it became pretty clear, to most of us anyway, that the prosecution did not prove that the daycare provider was responsible for the child's injuries. I tried to leave you hanging, the child was fine. So the child was alive and well and good, but sustained some injuries. I remember I thought, oh no, shaken baby, And that's a huge responsibility. And then I found out, oh, the baby's alive. Whew, good news. You still don't want people going around shaking babies, though. So whether the child's alive or not, you should probably do something about daycare providers that are injuring children. But the prosecution did not prove that these injuries were a result of something that happened in the care of this daycare provider. And so remember, you had to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. And a great number of us said the prosecution didn't prove that the lady did it. Like, I still don't know really what happened. Actually, the defense kind of sent us down another path, and many of us believe that we did know what it was, and it wasn't the daycare provider. That's a different story. And so we said, well, the prosecution just didn't prove it. And one person on the jury said, I know they didn't prove it, but I just feel like she's guilty. And then we talked about first and second degree, and she said, well, maybe not. Somebody said maybe not first degree, but second degree, because even if she doesn't get the worst, then we ought to at least do something to her, because I really feel like she did something. How many of you want to be accused of a crime and have somebody on your jury that goes, I know they didn't prove that so-and-so did it, but I just feel like they did it, so throw the book at her, right? How many of you want that person on your jury when you're innocent and you've been accused of something? Then you're like, I don't know where you stood before this message, but if you're being convicted, you're probably on the side of, let's do the rationale and the thinking over the emotion. Let's not trust the gut on this one. Let's use some reasoning and some higher level thinking on this, right? It was really shocking to hear, and somebody pointed, I don't think I was the one that had the courage, but somebody, I was ready, but somebody beat me to it, and I was glad. Somebody pointed out, we can't send someone to prison because you feel like they did it. That'd be the wrong way to go about that. By the way, she was acquitted. Even the bailiff and even the police officer, which I talked to later, sitting through the trial, said, yeah, I don't think she did it either. So that felt nice. So basically, I'm a hero. So if you didn't pick up on that. I don't know if you're still listening, but if you're not listening, I'm a hero. So you should. Thanks, Jeffrey. But I was really shocked that somebody wanted to criminally punish someone because of feelings that they had, and we were able to sort that out and overcome that. But it took a long time. Now I do want to say this. I don't know why I jotted this down here, but I used to hear about women's intuition, right? When I was young, I'm like, what is that? That sounds superstitious. That sounds weird and creepy and wrong, and I don't know. Then I got married. Any husbands in the place? I'm a believer in women's intuition. They have magic powers that the guys don't usually possess. I think women's intuition is real, but I would suggest to you that it's actually it's not an emotion. That my understanding of it is that women, being awesome, pick up on subtleties of, why you look at me like that? I wasn't being sarcastic. Women are awesome. He's just pandering. What, you don't think women are awesome? Come on. All right. I got looks from that. Like, you don't seem genuine. While they're amazing, and women's intuition is just a fascinating thing, it's based on their ability to pick up on subtleties and behaviors and stuff that guys are just like oblivious to. It's not really an emotional thing. And by the way, let's just say this. Can women's intuition ever be wrong? Yes. The men answer very quickly, yes. Not in my house, but probably in your house, it's wrong sometimes. So I don't know why I jotted that down here. I guess that's when I thought of it. I think it's real. I think women have some ability, clearly an ability in that regard that men are lacking, but we probably shouldn't trust that like, we probably shouldn't trust it in the same way we would trust higher rational thinking or even certainly God's word. By the way, the prosecutor didn't encourage us to go with our gut and to trust our feelings. Even the prosecutor didn't want us to just go back in the room and just sort of see how you feel about it. How I felt about it was sick. I didn't like hearing all that stuff, and I was tired, and it was quite unpleasant. So if I'm convicting based on how I feel, it probably wouldn't have been good for the accused. All right, so just real fast, I want to just touch on this subject. I could probably skip this. But I don't know if I've mentioned it. I think I have. Microaggressions. Let's talk about microaggressions. Sometimes that could be politically charged. You watch how I navigate this. Doesn't have to be politically charged. I submit to you, I heard a great explanation of microaggressions one time that I think many times when we're just, listening to talking points and news clips or whatever, we sort of get a wrong impression. So the original idea, I think, of microaggressions is I'm going to be a racist, but I don't want to get fired from my job. So I'm going to say horrible things subtly that are hurtful intentionally, but just questionable enough that I won't get in trouble for it. Or I'm going to be a creep at work, and I'm going to say things to the women that could be taken a couple different ways. And when I get hauled into HR, and I say, hey, I just meant it this way, but really I was being a jerk, right? This is an example. Some of you are looking at me like, when did you do that? I'm just giving an example. None of these things. I said I'm a racist, and somebody, that's the clip that they'll take out, right? I'm playing a role here that is not who I am. Right? So you can say the creepy thing or say the racist thing or say the hurtful thing in a way that I didn't mean it that way, right? Like husbands, I know some of you have tried this. It didn't work at home. Like, I didn't mean it like that. You did, but you still tried to get out of it, right? Thank you for laughing at that. I know I got nervous, like maybe I'm the only one that's ever happened to. I didn't mean it like that. So I think that could be a real thing. Like if you're being sleazy and creepy and nasty to women at work, but you're doing it in a clever way that you can't quite get fired, that's gross. That's the original intent of microaggressions. I don't know if I want to get on board with that quite yet, but I will say that the idea of it changed over time. And the idea became that if you say something even unintentionally, not intentionally hurtful, but you say something that you're not supposed to say, now that's a microaggression. So you can make a mistake, you can make a blunder, you can say that thing. I've thought of a good story. You can say that thing, see me after, that is perfectly innocent, but could be taken the wrong way. I'm a victim of this. I won't tell you the story because it's Sunday morning. But I said something perfectly sweet and harmless and truthful and innocent. Have I made my point yet? I can think of one occasion. It's sort of like a joke around our house. And the person that I spoke to didn't get offended. Offended wasn't took it a different way intentionally. Alex, you know what I'm talking about? Okay, never mind. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you on Sunday morning. You can't handle it. See me after. But I just said this thing, and somebody takes what you say and they make a joke out of it. That's kind of what it was. I can't bring myself to say it. Wait, is my mom here today? Oh, my mom's not here. I can say it. Still not gonna say it. So microaggressions kind of evolved into something. Even if you say something innocent and you didn't mean anything by it. Well, the word aggression sort of tells you that there was sort of something that you're guilty of, even if you were innocent in the thing that in the thing that you said. And that's where we're at today. And so the idea is that however that thing made you feel, whether the person meant it as disrespectful or racist or sexist or whatever, doesn't matter how they meant it, intention suddenly doesn't matter, where in the real world, intention sort of matters. If I bump into you accidentally, oh, sorry, usually that's all forgotten and you accept, and assuming that you're generous in your thinking towards me, that, well, that was an accident, and there's no grudge there. But if you think I did it on purpose, and I knocked you to the ground, and I did that on purpose, that's a different thing. So we usually get over things that aren't intentional very, very quickly. And so now the idea is that the accident, let's use the example of bumping into somebody, that the accidental bumping doesn't matter if it's an accident. It's just as bad as if you knock someone to the ground intentionally, right? So your intentions no longer matter. Why? It's how the person feels. People are being encouraged to take how they feel and apply that to situations in their lives. You see how that can be dangerous? Like if you want to set up a society and a world and a community that is destined for problems, then you should encourage people to base every interaction with another individual on how they feel about it, to never be gracious, to never overlook problems, to never overlook a statement or an action that may have been misinterpreted or may have just simply been a mistake. Like, it's going to be a rough place to live if that's the way we're going to be encouraged to think about one another. I know, for example, I read a list of all the things that you're not supposed to say. There's contradictions on the list, by the way. And one of the things that you're not supposed to say, and I immediately disregard this every single opportunity I have, you're not supposed to ask people, hey, where are you from? It's supposed to be a microaggression. So, I suppose you could say, where are you from? Like, you're not from here, you're a foreigner, you're somebody different, where are you from? So you could say that like a jerk, right? Or you could just say, hey, where are you from? I read you're not supposed to ask people that. I ask people that every chance I get. I'm like a magnet for accents. If you have an accent, I find you far more interesting than if you just talk like people in my house. I'm going to start a conversation with you, and I'm going to ask you where you're from, because I find it interesting. It's not like, where are you from, foreigner person? It's like, I think you're interesting because you're different. Something about you is different than me, and I find that fascinating. And the last few times I did it, I said, they say you're not supposed to ask this anymore because it's supposed to be bad. It's a microaggression. They say you're not supposed to ask about your accent. But I find it fascinating. Tell me about you, And when I start it that way, they usually just back away. No, they say, oh, that's fine. That's whatever. Like, tell me about, so the approach. So I love people, and I'm not going to stop asking people where they're from because somebody said that's a microaggression. If it's interpreted by the other individual as being rude and insensitive, I didn't mean it that way. Most of the dumb things I said, I didn't mean it, right? Like there's a few of the really dumb things that I actually meant to say. All right, we shouldn't take someone's unintentional offense to be aggressive. And that's the thinking that has changed in the world that we're in today. And we're being trained to be offended at every little thing. This is really good. I'll skip it. Maybe I'll throw it in next week. But I'll tell you this story very quickly about, I may have shared this before, but I read a story about a black woman. I don't remember what her job was. I think she was a comedian and something else. And she was married to a white man. And he was in a motorcycle accident. Anybody remember? I think I told this story before. And I have a lengthy account of her words, but I'll try to give you the gist of what she said. So he was in a motorcycle accident, and she met him at the hospital, and she was kind of present as they were working on him and really trying to save his life. And at a certain point, she records, I think she wrote this in a book, that somebody on the staff sort of rudely said, what is your connection to the patient? And, she's just trying to get information, figure out how, how's my husband doing and what's going on. And she was asked repeatedly, what's your connection to the patient? And it was kind of rude and kind of distant and not with great bedside manner. And she's thinking to herself, I can't believe I have to deal with this. Like, my husband is holding on by a thread, and I've got to deal with racism now here in the emergency rooms. It's ridiculous. But she evidently had some understanding of how emotions can play a part in your thinking, and she had like a process. I don't know what a process is, but she had some kind of process of evaluating, is this really what my brain is this, or is this an emotional thing? And so working through this process, she realized, this is an emotional situation, and I may well, think about the maturity of this, I may well be misinterpreting, how these people are responding to me, because I'm in an elevated emotional state. I might be judging them all as racist. It's an all-white hospital, by the way. I might be judging them as racist, and it might be my emotions, just because this is a tough situation to be in. And when she recognized that, she said, things began to change with the staff. Like, she says, I don't recall changing my behavior, but I recall just changing my thinking, that it's probably, I'm just freaked out right now. And by the way, they might be under some stress too. And she said, I began to notice they responding differently to me. So she noticed them responding differently. And she gives credit to the fact that she said, it was probably my attitude towards them that caused that change. What an amazing and insightful way to recognize, like, maybe it's me. And she said that I thought was one of the coolest things. She said, I recognized later, and she said, actually, people were very kind to her, and they brought her coffee, and they came out, and they checked on her, and they once she changed her thinking, the whole thing changed. When she decided to trust her mind and be rational about it, and not trust just how she was feeling at that moment, the entire situation changed. And she said, I also realized that the all-white hospital might have, how did she say it, a default way of thinking of what a married couple looks like. Just thought that was a cool way and a realistic way of saying that, right? Like, you might have a default expectation of what a married couple looks like. This couple didn't match the default thinking. And so she recognized they're not necessarily racist. It just maybe it threw them a bit. Maybe just threw them off a bit. She was very gracious in her attitude about that as a result of her thinking and recognizing, maybe I shouldn't have an emotional response. Maybe I should have a cerebral response instead. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. I'll give you another scripture. Paul said, therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal bodies so that you obey its evil desires. We're fallen. We have evil desires. Although we're redeemed by the blood of Christ, we're still sinful creatures. And Paul encourages us not to let the sin reign in our mortal bodies, that we obey its evil desires. So I would encourage you to pay attention to what is driving you. Like, be sensitive about this week. And when you make decisions, if you ever say to yourself, I just don't care anymore, you should see me with like flags waving and blowing trumpets and things, that you might be headed down the wrong path. But I want to encourage you this week to kind of examine your thinking. We've talked before about thinking about your thinking, but I want to encourage you to think about your emotional state. And what decisions might you make based on just how you feel? And I want to encourage you to not do that. Now, feelings can be an indication that something's wrong. It should be, it might alert you to something. Maybe it should wake you up. Like I feel grouchy, like that person is a jerk, maybe that means I need lunch. Right? You might be misinterpreting what it's telling you, but so your emotions are indications, but they certainly should never be our guide. All right, amen?
Amen.
All right, let's have the worship team come back up. We'll close with a song. Kenny has maybe something, I don't know. Okay, Renee has an announcement she'd like to make. Peter's going to make an announcement, so